What's up, everybody? I'm Scott Brio. This is a review of Firespacer by Firesonic. It's a new mixing plugin that uses dynamic EQ with sidechain input, so that you can sidechain one element to the other, and what it'll do is it will remove the conflicting frequencies of the other element based on what is coming into Firespacer. So, for instance, one of the most popular use cases would, of course, be like sidechaining the kick to the bass, or the kick to synths, or vocals, or anything that you want that needs to stick through the mix, and you've got two different parts of the song that are overlapping frequency-wise, and rather than scooping them out entirely with EQ, what you can do is use something like Firespacer, and it will remove those frequencies based on the input that comes in, which is really nice. And to be honest, that's how you get the cleanest mixes these days. The days of entirely removing parts so that they would fit like the kick with the bass and that sort of thing is kind of out the window. Traditionally, mix engineers would use like a compressor with a sidechain input for a similar effect, which works very well, but what you end up getting is you get the whole sound being compressed by the sidechain input. And you don't always want a compressed signal, even if it's just for a little bit of time, because ultimately what that does is it creates a pumping effect, and every time it's squished, it makes it just a little bit louder. So it's different than dynamic EQ, which is what Firespacer does. Now, sidechain compression still definitely has its use cases. It's a sound that people go for, but I would argue that these days you're getting cleaner mixes by using something like Firespacer because it's just more modern, it's technically cleaner, it's the proper use of sidechaining two elements together for mixing purposes and not for flavor or effect. So in today's video, I'm going to show you why I like Firespacer, and I'm also going to give it a little bit of constructive criticism. I'll be comparing it to Trackspacer, which is by Waves Factory. I'm basically comparing the two because, as far as I can tell, Trackspacer was kind of the predecessor to Firespacer. They're both similar and they can create the same effects, but Firespacer has a little bit more going on, has more control. So I'm going to show you how I use it, what those extra controls are, if they're beneficial, if it's something that you need versus something like Trackspacer. Again, they're both great plugins. I just want to compare the two so that you can make the decision for yourself. But before we get into it, Headroom Collective is a collaborative hub for music producers and DJs where you can get track feedback on a one-to-one basis with music industry pros. So if you're stuck on a song, something like that, you need advice, Headroom Collective has a host of music professionals that can help you through that process. They also have listening sessions, workshops, sponsor giveaways. If you're not signed up, you're missing out. So definitely check them out, headroomcollective.com. So regarding Firespacer, I'm not going to go through every feature and this and that because that's what the product manual is for. And to be honest, it's not that difficult to use. These plugins have a number of controls, but they're fairly easy to wrap your head around. You just load it up on the track that you want to affect, and then you assign it a sidechain input, and then you can tweak the knobs to kind of dial in the effect that you want. I am, however, going to show you what I like about it and how it differs from Trackspacer. If you want to just skip ahead and hear it in action, I'll leave a timestamp in the description below. So right off the bat, I'll say I like the user interface. It's well laid out. I'm a fan of dark mode plugins or dark mode everything because I'm staring at my screen so much as a mixing and mastering engineer, video producer, that sort of thing. And if you're not familiar with Trackspacer, is a white plugin, so that's an instant win for Firespacer right there. I will say Firespacer's plugin is a little dated looking. It looks kind of like a Waves plugin from the mid to late 2000s, but a little bit of retro isn't bad, and it's a nice clean user interface and it works well. So maybe they'll update it and modify it going forward. It's still a brand new plugin. I really like that you have your input meters and sidechain meters, as well as an output meter and volume adjustments for all of those. And it's got big knobs and easy to see frequency spectrum of what's actually going on and how it's being affected. I will say I don't really like the visual feedback as much in comparison to Trackspacer, mainly because your signal that's coming in via the sidechain input is the pink-red line in comparison to the affected signal, which is the white line with the color spectrum behind it going from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. What I like about Trackspacer is I like how the affected signal is shown going down and up versus Firespacer, which is going up and down and that sort of thing. To me, in my brain, it just makes more sense that it's going down because it's sidechain, and so it's ducking that signal. But again, not a huge deal, just personal preference. One of the biggest differences is that Firespacer gives you a lot more controls for your money. You got more control with the different spectral algorithms, the precision knob, and the release knob as well. These really help you dial in the flavor of what Firespacer is doing to the signal. And of course, they have the A/B section at the top there, which allows you to create two different sounds. You can flip between them. The plugin will remember that. And then like a undo, redo, which is nice. I don't think I'll ever really need that, but nice that it's there. To be honest, I didn't really notice a huge difference between the different spectral modes. I think Spectral 1 to me just sounded more like Trackspacer that I'm used to. Spectral 2, just a different flavor of kind of the same thing, but I liked Spectral 1 better. And then of course you have the no latency modes, 1 and 2. And those are, technically they're doing their thing, but they kind of lack a little bit of flavor. I think those are more meant, as far as I know, for live sound type of purposes, where you need zero latency. I've found that the release, the mix or amount knobs and the precision knob really do kind of the bulk of the hard work in Firespacer. So, if you only really had to use 3 knobs and you wanted to kind of treat it like Trackspacer, which is more simple, you could focus on those 3 knobs and really dial in a sound that's very similar. And of course, you have the minimum frequency and maximum frequency knobs as well. And those are great, if you don't want to affect the top end of your bass or have it affect the low signal, a kick, that sort of thing. The release knob is great because it really kind of allows you to dial in how long the effect is going to be of the duct signal in that frequency range. And so, I use a kick for this example because everybody knows what a kick sounds like. So by dialing back the release knob, you can really hear the pumping effect that Firespacer is doing to the track that it's on. All right, so let's flip over here to Ableton real quick. All right, so I have a little mock song here that I've made. It's just got some royalty-free loops. And what I'm gonna be focusing on is the way that I would use it most, which is using the kick to trigger Firespacer on the bass loop and even the vocals. And I've got Trackspacer loaded in there as well, just so we can hear the difference between the two. So here, let's play the song so you can hear the whole thing in its entirety.
We're going back to the old school, way back in the day. People came from miles around to hear the music play.
So there you go, just a pretty simple house track. But as you can see, we've got the kick, top loop, snares and perk, we've got a perk fill, bass loop, and the vocal. And so, of course, the bass loop here has Firespacer, and I will turn that on. I'll show you what it's doing to the bass loop here. Let's go ahead and play it back. Let's solo the kick and the bass loop just so we can hear the two of them together. And now Firespacer is off, and I will turn it on, and then I'll start making some adjustments. So that's with pretty modest amounts of ducking with the kick by Firespacer. So I'll go ahead and turn up the amount here, and you can hear it as it gets more extreme. So I will say, as you dial up this amount, you kind of have to bump up the output gain a little bit because it gets a little bit more quiet. But generally people aren't going to be using it at 100%. 50% is kind of the recommended amount by Firesonic. And I would agree, I think it's pretty, I go 25%, 50%, that sort of thing. Now, if we dial it up to 100%, and we can start adjusting the release here, and you'll start to hear the length of the triggering based on the release knob. You can think of it like a ADSR envelope. The release or decay or whatever you want to call it is going to set how long Firespacer is reacting. So right now it's kind of nice and tight here. You can bring it up. And again, it's just cutting out more of the bass loop because we have it so long there. If you dial it back, you can hear it really kind of quickly pumping there. And of course, the precision knob is kind of how accurate Firespacer is going to react based on the incoming signal. So I've got it at 100% right now, but if we dial it back, that one's a little bit tough to hear, but I don't doubt them that it's actually, being more precise or less precise. And we dial the amount back here to about 50%. And of course, we have the minimum frequency and the maximum frequency. And so now the kick, at 345 hertz ish is not really affecting the bass signal all that much. So of course we want to kind of leave that one down for this scenario, but we can, dial the max top frequency back. And so now you're getting, the kick, which is ducking, everything under 533 hertz, and it's leaving the top kind of passing through, which is nice. So go ahead and just, pull this back up. We'll just leave them both at off basically, so we can hear the bulk of what's going on. So let's dial up the amount here. I'm gonna turn the output up a little bit so we can hear it better. And I'm gonna change the spectral amounts here. This is spectral 1. So not a huge difference, but there is, some difference. I think it'll be a personal preference. And let's check out the no latency. These ones are good, and I'm sure there's a use case for them, but they just kind of lack the flavor, in my opinion. I'll usually just leave it on Spectrum 1, to be honest. And so let's bring this back a little bit, bring the amount back again. And another thing I like is, you can click on this little headphone. You can hear the sidechain input, just so you can kind of check and make sure that you're actually sending Firespacer the right sound. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn off Firespacer. It's our original bass loop signal. And let's turn on Trackspacer here, and let's see how that sounds in comparison. Here's Trackspacer. And this is just with its kind of usual, 17% that it loads up with. So again, Trackspacer has a little bit more of a pumpy effect, and that can be what you want. It can be what you don't want, for sure. I would say Firespacer is a little bit more transparent, a little bit more clinical, but of course you can dial in the pumping effect if you want. And as we dial up the amount here, it just gets more extreme. And again, you don't really have a release knob. You don't have a precision knob. You've got the low cut, high cut, which is similar. But that's about it as far as what Waves Factory is giving you with Trackspacer. All right, so let's hear the kick sidechained to the vocals here. Bring the vocals.
Back to the old school. Going back to the old school.
All right, and this is without Firespacer on it.
We're going back to the old school.
All right, let's go ahead and turn it on. I left it there on full amount, but you can really hear it kind of pumping. But it still sounds good. You can hear the kick, you can hear the vocal. And if you dial the amount back, really kind of letting the kick punch through, and you can hear both of them. But if we turn it off,
people came from miles around.
You can really kind of hear them stepping over each other. If we turn it back on, and dial it in a little bit much.
Going back to the old school.
Maybe play with the release here a little bit.
To the old school. We're going back to the old school. Way back in the day.
A little too pumpy, but still sounds good.
Miles around.
And then of course, let's hear Trackspacer. That's way more extreme, That's at 100%, and you don't really have the controls that you might have on Firespacer. So, if you dial it back, Trackspacer definitely sounds good, but again, it can't really change the release. You get the freeze button here. Never really use that, but both are good. But sometimes you're going to want the controls that Firespacer is going to give you. Yeah, we'll turn both on here. On both the bass loop and the vocals.
Way back in the day.
And just listen to the whole track with both of them engaged.
Hear the music play. We're going back to the old school. Back to the old school.
Okay, so there you have it. What's my conclusion? Well, I think both are great plugins for sure. Firespacer is definitely giving you more control, more use cases, and comes down to personal preference. But again, there's things that I like about Firespacer. I would choose over Trackspacer, especially the dark GUI. And essentially you can dial in the same sound with both of them, but you're gonna get more sounds available, more flavors out of Firespacer. And another feature that I just realized that they had was intelligent sleep on silence mode. So the plugin intelligently detects whether it makes sense to perform processing at all and turns on sleep mode if not, which essentially uses no CPU at all. And that's really nice. I wish more plugins had that. So, if you're doing live sound and you need those latency-free modes, assuming that's what they're for, I would definitely give Firespacer a try over Trackspacer. Also, if you can't afford Trackspacer, which I think comes in at $59 right now. Let's see at, $59 for Trackspacer. And Firespacer right now is running an introductory discount of $78, which brings it from $75 down to $16, which is pretty cheap. Doesn't get much cheaper than that. So a great time to give this a try if you're interested. And they also give you free for life updates, which is nice. So it's gonna only get better from here. So if you wanna give it a shot, go ahead and click the affiliate link in the description below. That will help Headroom Collective as well as myself as a content creator. And be sure to check out headroomcollective.com if you want track feedback, you want to check out the local events or the workshops that they have with industry pros. Also, be sure to check out my website, which is www.scottbrio.com. If you need mixing and mastering, or you just want to check out my music or my tutorial videos, or you can check out my channel too on YouTube. All right, so thank you for joining me here. I am Scott Brio. This has been a good one, and I will see you on the next video. Peace out.